welcome everyone for coming to our webinar today, Staying Above the Competition with Cloud Migration. My name is Summer Becker and I'm the training lead here at ProcessMaker. I'll be giving a short introduction before we get started, but after that we're going to get around to the actual content, which I'm really excited about today, which will be presented by Peter Brown, our VP of Sales here at ProcessMaker. And then we have a very special guest today, Claudia Morales, who is from AWS as a Partner Solutions Architect. And she is going to be telling us all about the cloud architecture at AWS. So as a reminder, I'd like to let you guys know that you can submit questions at any time throughout the webinar, and we will be having a Q&A session at the very end. But without any further ado, let me go ahead and get started with a brief introduction about what we're going to cover today, and then I'll let Peter get around to his excellent content. So basically, why should companies move to the cloud? So as we all know, every company is on the cloud, and if you're not, you might be kind of a latecomer. However, what holds a lot of companies back is that they have some data security concerns that keep them wanting to manage their own servers on premises. However, what we need to find out is what the benefits are and how can we weigh those benefits against any data security concerns by deploying on the cloud, which is what Peter is going to cover and Claudine is going to cover. So how does being on the cloud benefit organizations? So as I just mentioned briefly, there's a bunch of software tools that are available on the cloud. And if you're using a full set of software tools, it makes it a lot easier to connect software tools that are also on the cloud. If you're on premises, there's a little bit of finagling you have to do to be able to connect all of your software tools to each other to create a more seamless experience for your users, whether they be customers or internal users. But then if you want to move to the cloud, how do you keep data secure through all of those connections? And that's where AWS comes in with their excellent security and cloud infrastructure that Claudine is going to be talking a little bit about today. So that's all I have to say about the introduction. So let me go ahead and let Peter take it over.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time. Excited to go through this together, and please send chats throughout with any questions that you guys may have. Just want to make sure that you get all your questions answered as you need to throughout the webinar today. So the basic agenda of what we're going to go through is we've obviously gone through introductions. We're going to talk about a few key things, talking about the tech revolution as a whole. A lot of times we think we're well into the kind of the tech revolution, and I think that's a good assessment. Many organizations kind of think, well, I've already moved to the cloud, and we'll talk about that. What is the cloud anyway? I know it seems out of place. Why don't we start with that? I actually want to, really lead inductively to that question, because I think that's a crucial question to be asked within an organization. And then ultimately, how do I deploy then the cloud in terms of migration there? So with that said, let's jump into kind of the tech revolution here. If you think about the world that many of us grew up in, I remember the days before computing was really a thing in terms of the mainstream of culture. Certainly there were mainframes and have been since, 1956. When the first IBM mainframe was released with COBOL and ZOS and whatnot. A fun fact there, although I'm not quite old enough to have worked on that first iteration of the IBM mainframe, I actually was a COBOL developer in my past life, so I have worked on those green screens. But before that day, of course, businesses were run by paper, and whether that was customer documents, correspondence like letters, accounting with calculators or maybe abacuses, take your pick there. Maybe the world where Xerox was kind of the key player, right? Whether it was printing, scanning, things like that. The rise of mainframe computing, of course, especially in the late 70s and early 80s, started to change a lot of that. So I'm fortunate to have worked for, not worked for. My father was one of the lead developers on the IBM mainframe interface, as well as some other functions. So as far as back as I can remember, we always had a personal computer. In fact, my dad built his own personal operating system for fun so that we could play with it. So I remember as a kid playing games on our custom-made operating system. But all of that changed with one company in particular, EDS, where they became an outsourced IT shop for all these other businesses. So companies, whether they were banks or whether they were manufacturers, whether they were things like, other clients that I know they had, Kodak, Xerox, other people that I mentioned, started to do the digital transformation, but they didn't have the infrastructure capabilities in terms of economy of scale. So they couldn't afford to buy their own servers and mainframes and build huge data centers, so they outsourced it to people like EDS. And we'll come back to that, of course, because I think that's very conceptually similar to what we're talking about with AWS. But as we all know, in the early 80s in particular, things like Microsoft Office, the Mac OS and Windows started to come out where PCs allowed regular workers to be able to do digital transformation with things like Excel and Word and Outlook and other functions. And then maybe in the kind of the mid-90s, we have the rise of the ERP, right, where Oracles and SAPs of the world started to have this vision and promise of being the end-to-end, end-all, be-all for digital transformation, where anything within an organization would live within that ERP. But, in the early 2000s, in particular, people started realizing that wasn't maybe going to solve all the problems. So things like CRMs started to become a key talking point. And now we have, Salesforce.com, one of the most valuable companies in the world, kind of based around that entire premise. So why do I start with this? Well, I think that a lot of the rise of the tech revolution is the same kind of that we're experiencing today with the rise of cloud. So let's kind of move to the second point. So the first point really is, kind of haven't we already experienced this before? The second one is, well, haven't we already started to move to the cloud? So we have that picture that we were just looking at, but all of that automation and digital transformation has simply allowed multiple silos within our organizations. So we have some data in a CRM, some data maybe in SAP, some data in QuickBooks, some data in Google or Outlook. We have data all over the place. And while APIs in theory should be able to connect all of these different systems, we certainly who in the IT space know that often those systems are very closed and not every endpoint's exposed, and often takes months if not years to get access to said information. So what that means is then we see all kinds of bottlenecks, and there's lots of back and forth between systems, rekeying of data, lots of potential error. So what's happened in certainly the last decade to 15 years, we have all these cloud solutions, whether that's Salesforce, Dropbox, Slack, PayPal, etc., DocuSign, all of these Microsoft 365, Office 365. We have all these different point solutions, but they haven't really solved the ultimate problem. There's still often a frustrating experience when you're talking about internal or external stakeholders. So, for example, if I'm a person who's using Salesforce.com within an organization in the cloud, accessed anywhere, I may log into Salesforce to look up a customer record, but then I need to open my Gmail to send out an email, and then I need to send a Slack message to my boss, and then I need to upload documents via Dropbox, and then send a customer contract through DocuSign, and none of it's kind of seamlessly integrated. So that's kind of the backdrop for moving to talking about kind of migrating to the cloud. So all of that was leading up to, let's kind of define what the cloud is. So many people use it just as a buzzword, where they want to sell some software to some organizations and they say, oh, I'm in the cloud. But oftentimes people don't really know what is meant by that. So I think it's important to start kind of setting the stage for this. So as an organization, we can start putting together a strategic roadmap where we don't see that messy picture we just saw a moment ago. So what is cloud? I think it is bare bones. It's actually really a business model more than it is a set of tools. Because the same tooling that you can use with Salesforce could be deployed on-premise. A lot of it really has to do with the delivery model of said business. So there's the self-service model, which is the traditional one. If we think back to the early 80s with, say, Microsoft, their deployment model for their customers was they created the software, they delivered it, they tried to capture as much market share as they could, and then defend that market share. It was very linear, or think like project management at a waterfall methodology, not very agile, not iterative. And what's changed with the cloud and the ability to manage things over the internet is the ability for the rise of the as-a-service model, software as a service, platform as a service, et cetera. And that's allowed, a vendor service model where customers can self-service, and this allows a much more iterative approach as a business model. So what does that mean then for us today as organizations? Well, there's really kind of three legs to the stool, or kind of foundational points to what the cloud is. I think its highest level, we can define the cloud as three types of as a service. There's infrastructure as a service, like Amazon Web Services. There's platform as a service, where that's a combination of vendors like Amazon, where they have their own kind of developer tooling, but also vendors like ProcessMaker, where maybe not the development community, but citizen developers. And then there's SaaS, where it's more end customer or end stakeholder user type facing. So you have these different layers of the cloud, and obviously there's various different vendors that help in all of the different areas. So certainly that's one of the reasons we have been excited to be a strategic partner with Amazon, because they're providing a lot of these layers of the cloud, and then of course we have our own kind of aspect to that. So let's talk about the three there. I think the high level, the three benefits that you can get with migrating to the cloud in SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS are listed here. So with SaaS, it's really all about the people, and I'll explain more about that in a moment. With platforms as a service, it's really about getting back to business, and then infrastructure, it's about economies of scale. So let's start with SaaS. A lot of times, if you think about end users' experience with day-to-day tasks, without, say, anything to do with software, you can break their tasks up into a quadrant. Covey is a pretty standard quadrant here, where you have tasks broken into important and not important, and then urgent and not urgent. And of course, the intersection of those things relate to the quadrant. So you have urgent things that are important, and those are tasks. You have not urgent things that are important. Those are strategic. Those are relationships. You have not important things that are urgent, and those are just interruptions. And then not urgent things that are not important, really just kind of busy work. And what happens in users' day-to-day life is often the quadrant looks, in reality, a lot more like this, where interruptions and busy work take a lot of the front seat, and real, true value tasks and strategic relationships with people get kind of put on the back burner. It's kind of the always fighting a fire mentality. So what's kind of the goal with SaaS is making it super easy for the end user to do their job wherever they are, whenever they need to, with kind of any device. So think, again, the easy one, Salesforce.com, using that on a cell phone, using it on a tablet, using it at the office. And that's where vendors, like ProcessMaker, are certainly going to allow organizations like yourself to allow access anywhere. And that's a combination, of course, a web architected solution like ProcessMaker, where everything is built off of a tech stack that's intended to be used through a browser, or of course native apps in the App Store for iOS and Android, but also a cloud infrastructure like Amazon Web Services. So this can be wherever they're working on the go as they need to do their work. We've certainly seen the rise of this, especially as workforces have started to become more and more remote employees, where people are working from home, or maybe they're working from things like WeWork or a variety of other shared working spaces. It allows people to be a lot more productive, focusing on the important tasks as well as strategic relationships. So ultimately, the goal, I think, of any SaaS solution should be enabling people through technology. It's not to try to replace people. It's rather to give them tools that they can use to do their day-to-day jobs more effectively. It allows organizations to scale with the same staff that they have, whether the goal is to grow the top line, or to make sure that you're affording the bottom line from a profit perspective. So then the second aspect that I think that we really want to be focused on as we migrate to the cloud is platforms as a service. And in often cases, the platform as a service might look something like a development tool, whether that's a basic IDE, or whether it's a tool that allows you to build solutions with low code, whether that's a BPM, or whether it's a document management system, a content management system, a variety of different solutions that allow low code. But traditionally, a lot of platforms as a service have really required maybe the 80-20 rule, 80% coding and 20% business expertise. So when we're thinking about migrating to the cloud with platforms as a service, we really want to be thinking internally as an organization, how can I scale effectively? So breaking things out with low-code delivery into different areas of expertise. Our business person, a business functional user, the subject matter expert, being able to self-service some of their low-code platform as a service. The business analyst or the expert at processes being able to do that, again, independently as well with low-code. But of course, the world is not going to really ever probably be at a point with a no-code solution. There's always going to be a need for some sort of customization where developers do need to get in and build scripting within some sort of programming language. So thinking about that then as a best practice, the goal with platform as a service, as you translate and migrate to the cloud with those types of toolings, is really focusing on allowing the bandwidth of IT to increase by leveraging more and more of the business side of the house to self-service. So those are the kind of the first two that I was going to be tackling of kind of migrating to the cloud. The last area, of course, we're going to talk about, and I'm going to pass the baton to Claudine here, is talking about infrastructure as a service. So where AWS has clearly been the leader in this and will continue to be for many, many years to come. And they've certainly proven this as not only leaders in North America, but all around the world. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Claudine.
Great, thank you for that. Let me start sharing my screen. Great, awesome. Well, I've been introduced earlier, but I would like to say my name again. My name is Claudia Morales, and I'm a Partner Solutions Architect at AWS. I'm based out of Seattle, Washington, and first of all, I'd like to thank the team at ProcessMaker, who is an AWS Partner Network Advanced Technology Partner, for making me a part of today's webinar. In this presentation, I'm going to cover some fundamental concepts in AWS security as well as some general practices. And this is because security in the cloud is a really big topic. A lot of people are wondering, is the cloud secure? So I'd like to start by saying that at AWS, security is really job zero, and it will always be our top priority. And that's true to our internal culture as an organization, where every employee is responsible for upholding security standards in their day-to-day and is empowered to report and escalate security issues if needed. And that is, of course, also true to the extensive security technologies that we offer our customers as a cloud provider. We have a team of world-class experts who are entirely dedicated to helping our customers secure their data in the cloud. We have over a decade of experience supporting millions of active users per month, and these are customers all over the world, businesses of varying sizes, running every imaginable use case. And we've been able to establish best practices around security that have been validated not just by the security experts on our customers' end, but also security auditors around the world to respond to the compliance requirements of our most demanding customers. We have worked really hard to achieve compliance with many certification and accreditation programs. This is an extensive list of those programs, but these programs include global programs such as PCI DSS, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3. It also includes U.S. government-wide programs like NIST, FedRAMP, FISMA, and also a number of assurance programs that are recognized in Asia Pacific and Europe. And because we manage these programs in our infrastructure, we can help our customers more easily meet their compliance requirements. If you have any compliance requirements for your workload, or if you want to know more about our compliance programs, I would encourage you to visit the AWS compliance page. The link is currently showing on your screen. Our customers benefit from the best practices in our policies, data center and network architecture, and operational processes that we have built to satisfy the needs of our most security-sensitive customers. And our security technologies also scale with you, so no matter how big your business grows on AWS, you are inheriting these best practices that we have built. Not only that, but we help you save on costs because we do a lot of the heavy lifting for you in many areas, and that takes away the need for you to spend money managing those components. I will touch on some of those components as I go through the rest of this presentation. That said, I'd like to tell you something important about how we view security on AWS. The fact is, AWS alone cannot achieve all of your security and compliance objectives on our own. It is very much a shared responsibility. AWS controls and manages certain components, but you as a customer have to do your part. You have your share of duties to protect your AWS environment. And to break that concept down, the AWS Shared Responsibility Model, as you see here, defines who is responsible for securing which components. So the orange layers are what AWS has access to and what AWS controls and manages. We refer to that portion, the orange portion, as security of the cloud. So this includes our global infrastructure. That means AWS regions. AWS regions are geographic regions where we cluster our data centers. That also includes our availability zones. Availability zones are the clusters of data centers that we have within a particular AWS region. And then our edge locations. Edge locations are what Amazon CloudFront, which is our content delivery network service, uses to deliver content to end users across the globe with lower latency. So today, the AWS Cloud currently spans 66 availability zones across 21 geographic regions around the world, with announced plans for 12 more availability zones and 4 more regions in Bahrain, Cape Town, Jakarta, and Milan. The global network of AWS edge locations today consists of 187 points of presence with 176 edge locations and 11 regional edge caches in 69 cities across 30 countries. AWS is also responsible for designing and building our services, the services that we deliver to you, securely. The blue layers are what the customer has access to and what they control and manage. So that is your security in the cloud. This includes selecting which services you use, building your application securely, defining who or what gets access to which resources in your AWS infrastructure, what data you store, and where you store that data. This also includes how you encrypt that data. You are always in full control and ownership of your data on AWS. We offer a huge set of services and features to help you with your encryption needs for data at rest and data in transit. We have services like AWS Key Management Service and AWS Cloud HSM to enable you to create and manage encryption keys that you can use to protect your data on AWS. It's important to point out here too that AWS does not have access into the customer account. So the blue part, AWS does not have access into any of those layers in the blue part. And in turn, the customer does not have access into the underlying part, which is the orange layers. So digging further into the shared responsibility model, AWS is responsible for the security of the host operating system down to the virtualization layer. We also take care of the physical security of our data centers. Our data centers are highly secure by design. Our process really for selecting our data center locations involves many hours of analyzing potential threats and designing necessary controls to mitigate risk. So for instance, our availability zones are designed to have redundant power feeds to withstand power outages and built to be independent and physically separated from each other so that we can reduce risk from potential environmental events like earthquakes, flooding, extreme weather conditions. We also have professional security staff at all entry points of our data centers, and access is granted only to authorized personnel who are restricted to the specific layers of the data center that they need access to, and only for the specific amount of time that they need access. We have surveillance and detection systems in place to monitor, detect, and alert on security incidents. So as an AWS customer, you can leverage our highly secure data centers, and you can save on costs as well because you don't have to manage any of that. So now what do you have to do as a customer to help protect your data in the cloud? The answer there is it really depends on the AWS services that you choose to consume. So let's talk about Amazon EC2 instances, for example. As I've mentioned earlier, AWS does not have access into the EC2 instances that you are running. You are responsible for securing the guest operating system. So that includes proper access. You should limit access to and from your EC2 instances based on the principle of least privilege. The AWS Identity and Access Management, or IAM, is a service that is provided to our customers free of charge that allows our customers to implement fine-grained access to their AWS resources, but you as a customer would have to define those configurations. You have full control over your IAM policies. Customers are also responsible for security group configuration. Security groups act like firewalls that control inbound and outbound traffic for EC2 instances. So as best practice, you should always think least access when defining your security groups. Only open ports that need to be open, or maybe don't expose your database to the public internet. You're also responsible for software updates and security patches. There's a lot of malware out there designed to capitalize on known security flaws in your software or your operating system. And as best practice, you should be applying updates and patches immediately when they're available. And you should know if you're missing any patches. I'd like to point out that this shared security model is beneficial for customers because you get the flexibility that you need to deploy applications with your desired configurations while being able to rely on AWS to do the heavy lifting in many areas. You can leverage the many security services and features and compliance programs that AWS has so that you can have more time to focus on innovating and building the products that really differentiate your organization. AWS offers a robust suite of security services and features, as you can see here, that can help you meet your security objectives. Apart from that, we also work very closely with our vibrant community of AWS Partner Network partners who offer hundreds of tools and features to help you better secure your applications in the cloud. I'd like to encourage you to learn more about the AWS Shared Responsibility Model and download the AWS Security Best Practices white paper using the respective links that you see here on your screen. And that's it for me. I hope this was helpful, and thank you again to the ProcessMaker team for having me here today, and thank you everyone for joining.
All right, thank you everyone for joining. Let me just show my screen here quickly. All right, so at this time you guys can submit any questions you have for Peter and Claudine. And again, I would like to thank both Peter and Claudine for joining us today and taking some time out of their busy days to give these excellent presentations for us about cloud migration. While you guys are submitting your questions, I'd like to talk about some of the upcoming webinars that we have. Right now we have a scheduled webinar concerning digital transformation in higher education, revolutionizing the student journey, which is scheduled for Tuesday, July 23rd at 2 p.m. New York time. So if you would like to register for that, you can feel free to go to our page at processmaker.com/services/webinars. So again, at this time, feel free to submit your questions and we'll get around to answering those. So the first question we have reads, how has PM and AWS overcome internal policy restrictions on info being hosted on-premise? I think that could be a question for both Peter and Claudine.
Sure. So I'll start, and then we'll Claudine can chime in. So ProcessMaker, from time to time, has seen where customers have maybe some bureaucratic policies that were maybe made sense 10, 15 years ago, but certainly not today in terms of cloud and hosting of certain data. So one particular customer I've worked with closely comes to mind where the chief information officer actually said he believed that that AWS and ProcessMaker, using the shared responsibility model with both our controls as well as AWS's, had better security controls than the organization themselves. However, his policy was written and it would have had to go to the board of directors in order to change that. So what we've also found is we can leverage a hybrid approach. So with ProcessMaker, we've actually deployed an application layer in the cloud on AWS where the application runs on Amazon Web Services, but then the database is actually an on-premise database. So a kind of a hybrid approach of both the best of AWS infrastructure, but then allowing to kind of meet the policy requirements of our customers. So that's an example of where we've been able to kind of work around maybe policy restrictions. Obviously, the ideal goal would be to change policy because, of course, AWS and ProcessMaker with the shared responsibility model have plenty of good controls in place.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I just would like to add that as a business, you will need to really review all your compliance requirements and decide which route to go. So if there is a certain compliance requirement that really requires you to put your data on premise, that is something that you would have to it's a business decision that you would have to make. But totally agree on the points that that have been raised to answer this question.
Awesome, thank you. Let's move on to the next question. How does ProcessMaker help with the customer side of AWS Shared Responsibility Model? And I think this one's for Peter.
Yeah, good question. So as Claudine pointed out, there's a great shared model there where it gives access for customers of AWS to be able to really control their configuration of security parameters and whatnot. So in terms of ProcessMaker with our application, if you're looking to leverage ProcessMaker in our AWS instances, those are actually configured and set up by our Cloud Ops information security team. And so we've done a lot of work to make sure that we are using all best practices from AWS. Our engineering team are certified in that. And so we're leveraging kind of some of the best practices for that shared model. It makes it easier for you as the end customer through kind of the partnership there to not have to do as much of the work on your side.
Okay, next question. Do you have an interesting case study example to show?
So, I mean, obviously, a few that come to mind. I think one that I mentioned already was the hybrid model. That's certainly an interesting one where we were able to get around maybe some internal red tape. But certainly I think other success stories that I've seen is where internally we've had our kind of champion team that's working with ProcessMaker bring us in as well as AWS to present to management. So I've done that with another case where the upper management as well as the board of directors had kind of an unusual fear of the cloud. And so we came in and co-presented with Amazon Web Services in order to alleviate some of those fears. And I think oftentimes that's really what it is. So I highly recommend that as kind of a best practice approach. If you're struggling and running into kind of internal red tape there around the cloud, but you see the value of kind of migrating, I would highly recommend, talk to your ProcessMaker sales rep or to your Amazon Web Services sales rep and help us kind of sell that internally for you.
All right, let me read off the next question. Can we use standalone database hosted in AWS to access from ProcessMaker?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think what is asked there is really a ProcessMaker question. Thanks for that. I believe the question is, maybe you have spun up a database that you're hosting locally in AWS, and can you leverage ProcessMaker on top of that AWS database? I mean, the short answer is yes, technically it's very possible. Again, that would be a business decision that would be made. I think that there's certainly some benefit to allow ProcessMaker to manage that, as we have many customers, thousands of folks kind of using our infrastructure, and so we kind of worked through a lot of the kinks. But certainly it is possible technically to do that. Simply, it's actually not that different than doing an on-premise installation. You would simply take your AWS instance and deploy ProcessMaker inside of that instance.
All right. I think the next question will be for Claudine. Does AWS use load balancers?
We do have.
And what happens in the case of a failure? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry about that. Yes, we do have load balancing services available that you can use, AWS native load balancers. But you are also free to bring your own load balancer application to AWS. So again, this is a business decision that you have to make. But if you do decide to use AWS native of load balancing services, they are there for you. What happens in case of failure, my answer to that would be whenever you're architecting an application, you should always design for failure. So we have many resources that can provide you guidance for architecting applications to withstand failure. Architecting applications so that you can fail over somewhere in case of an outage.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Claudine and Peter. Since this webinar is running a little long, I think we're going to leave it here. So again, I would like to thank everyone for coming to our webinar. And if you have any further questions, you can feel free to email us at info@processmaker.com or call us at 919-289-1377. And then, of course, our main website is processmaker.com. Again, thank you everyone so much for attending. Thank you, Peter and Claudine, for your time and your presentations. And I hope to see you all at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks so much.